Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Terumais, Pede Gimel, Halacha Gimel, and Halacha Dalid, learning Daf Lamed Aleph. This is going to be the second to last daf of the third chapter. We're going to start on Daf Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top, and let's quickly go back that we learned in the Mishnah that there is an Isur, whether it is Midoraisa, whether it's Midarabanan with an Asmachta, right? So it's either learned from or it's being leaned on the pasuk in Mishpatim Mileyascha, which refers to Bikurim. Vidimacha, that refers to Truma. Loi sa'acher, pshat, don't delay. Our drasha is, don't give them out of order. The question of the Gemara is going to be really lundish. I used to learn these questions in yeshiva when we learned Achroinim, the later Achroinim. This type of what we call a chakira. The Gemara is going to ask, is the isur, listen to my words, to be magdim the mu'uchar, or is the isur to be ma'acher the mugdam? These exact words you don't have in the Gemara. It's cute, at least I can see Yakir's face. You have to chap this. In other words, when are you violating? Let's say Bikurim and Truma. If I separated Truma before Bikurim, am I going to be, let's go with Malkus. Am I chayiv Malkus when I separated the Truma? Or only when I separated the Bikurim after the Truma? Is the Isur to be Magdim the Mu'uchar? Truma's the Mu'uchar, right? Vis-a-vis Bikurim. So the moment I was Magdim the Mu'uchar, I violated, or no? The Isur only is to be Ma'acher the Mugdam. Prior to being Ma'acher the Mugdam, you didn't yet violate. Mitanaf Kamina also in the Gemara. Okay. The Gemara from there is going to bring a braisa that seemingly is at odds with the ruling of the Mishnah, and indeed we will see that it's really a machloikas tanoim, and not everyone agrees that Bikurim has to come before Truma. Actually, our Mishnah already said there was a Havamina in our Mishnah. They're both called Reishis, they're both called Truma, both Bikurim and Truma. And Taka, there was a Tana that holds that they are very different, but they don't have to follow the Seder. Yet Truma, Maiserishan, Maiserseni does have an order, but Bikurim is left out of that. And from the Sugya, we'll have an opportunity to review something that we learned in the previous Masechta. We'll speak it out again. The words will be that Kol HaKoidim es Chaveroi, Chaveroi Mischayev Boy. In other words, we're going to just talk out again what we did when we learned the Mishnah. Aside of the prohibition of changing the order, what happens if someone changed the order? So a person separated Maiser Rishon before they separated Truma. So we're going to see that from the Maiser Rishon, you have to separate Truma. If a person separated Maiser Sheni before Maiser Rishon, from the Maiser Sheni, you'll have to separate Maiser Rishon, Kol HaKoidem as Chaveroi, Chaveroi Mischayev Boy, with the big exception that if a person separated Trumas or Maisres before the time of Chiyuv, before they made Ruach, the expression in Chazal is if a person gave Maiser from the Shibalin, there we do not say that Kol HaKoidem as Chaveroi Mischayev Boy, because nothing was Mischayev yet. As well, we'll speak this out. This is really for the, these are rules that we review on occasion. On Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, we're going to begin with the fourth Pedic of this chapter, fourth halacha, the fourth Mishnah of this Pedic. And there the Mishnah is going to speak about a new sugya. What happens if someone misspeaks when they make a declaration? Meaning, when the person separated Truma, and they wanted to separate Truma, but they said Maiser. In other words, there isn't Piv V'liboy Shavin. What will be the halacha? Really, this isn't only a question concerning Trumas or Maisres. This is also Negea, all Nidrei Hegdish. All Nidrei Hegdish. Person wants to be Magdish or Karban, and they really want to be Magdish or Shlamim. And they say Oila, or vice versa. Bechlal by Nedarim and Shvuos. We will see that in these 4 areas, Trumas or Maisres, Nidrei Hegdish, Nedarim, and Shvuos, Piv, V'liba, you have to be Shavin. Really, the Gemara is going to speak about something that we mentioned a lot. Vadai, Truma does not need to be separated through action. You could separate truma through a hafrasha, but you can separate truma through a declaration. That was the whole sugya that we learned the previous sugya. When you make a declaration, does there have to be specificity? Yes or not? But you can do it orally. All of that is based from the words v'nechshav lochem trumaschem v'nechshav machshava. Could you even do it only through mental? Is a mental expression enough to be magdish truma that's really a machloikis? And what we will see in our sugya, that even according to the opinions and even in the scenarios where machshava alone is enough, nevertheless, if I had machshava, which is the ikir, but my words contradicted my machshava, was I had in mind to separate truma. But I said the word ma'aseh, even if machshava alone is enough, we don't allow words to contradict the machshava. If there is such a contradiction, nothing goes into effect, as we will see in the sugya of halacha dalad on Amud Beis. But let's begin on daf lamed aleph, Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top, right by the dot. Asks the Gemara, "Ei mosai hu oiver." Ei mosai hu oiver means exactly like we spoke out in our words of introduction. Let's speak just as an example, bikurim and truma. A person gave truma, separated truma before the bikurim. At what point is he oiver? Whether you're chayiv malchus, whether you're not chayiv malchus, machlokes hamayroim. Rabbi Barba says mitchila. Mitchila means that the prohibition is to be magdim the me'uchar. Truma vis-a-vis bikurim is the me'uchar, is the one that should come later. When you anticipate that which should have been given at a later stage, when you're magdim the me'uchar, that is the isur, and that's when you violated the lav. And if you chayiv malchus, that's when you get malchus. Aber the chiddush will be Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak says no. Makes a sense. There's a logic to that. Out of order, if I only separate one thing, it's not out of order. There's only one thing. Order demands two. Like the word big and small. Big does not exist if there aren't two things relative to the small one. This one is the big one. If there's only one, there's only one. Hashem yachid, Hashem echad. Right? So when you went out of, when you went out of order, when you separated truma and then you separated bikurim. Well, that's a big chiddush, because that actually it will be saying that if a person doesn't want to be oiver, if they, for whatever reason, if they separated truma, what are we telling that Jew? Don't separate bikurim? That's hard to say, because I don't want to be oiver. So what should I do? Burn everything? Baltashchis?
Did he separate other produce for this?
So Rabbi Mendel is asking whether he can separate from other produce. No, because I'm separating it for this produce. In this produce, the Torah says, it's very rare. It's what you would think, das balabatim. What's the sin? You should have separated bikurim. You separated truma. That was an avedo, no? Yes, but no, because the isur is only when you're ma'acher the mu'ugdam. When the mugdam is bikurim. When you're ma'achered, that's when you violate it. And
didn't we just establish in the introduction that you just take from the truma if bikurim was forgotten? If Meiser Rishon, for instance, right, gave as a Meiser Shani in the wrong order, so you do from Meiser Shani on Meiser Rishon.
That's correct. So the fact that the truma never had bikurim removed from it yet, the obligation, the objective obligation of bikurim isn't only on the remaining pile, it's also on the truma. Yes, Yakir, you're right. And we're saying that when you now separate bikurim, now you are over the loisa acher.
Hey, Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Doesn't the bikurim have to dafka be those first fruits that you designate when they're growing?
No. Because you're asking a more general question. How would I even know what's the first fruits? The idea would to put the gemi, right? To mark those that began to bud or grow first. What happens if I made no such mark? Did I lose the mitzvah of bikurim? Am I exempt from bikurim? No, I'm not. We learned that in the Rambam. Okay, now my nafka mi bineyoin. What's the difference between these two opinions? Okay, I get what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is telling you don't have an option not to separate bikurim. That you don't have. So you're going to be violating anyways. You're chayiv to separate bikurim. I'm going to say something funny. Asay doicha lois asay. You can't not separate bikurim. So since anyways you're going to do the right thing, so who cares when are you violating? So the Gemara says, L'seiru fakri. Chevra, samach and sin are interchangeables, especially in the Yerushalmi. So make a sin. If it got burned, if the produce got burned, now you cannot. If it's here, you have to. But now that you can't, al date de Rabchia barva. This is great. That says the violation was when you're magdim the me'uchar. You were already magdim the me'uchar. You already gave truma before the bikurim. You already violated, and you're gonna get beaten. Al date de Rab Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. Now that it got burned, now you're not going to separate the bikurim later. Now you're not going to be ma'acher the mugdam, and therefore eina oiver. If you will never separate bikurim, you would not violate. How great is that? And that is the shita of Rab Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. Now comes Rab Shmuel bar Abba. Don't confuse them. And he asked. Now let's go to the case that we mentioned. Ma'aser Rishon shegdima b'shibalim. Ooh, so nachamol. If I was already chayiv to separate the trumas from ma'aseres, let's put bikurim on the side. I want to speak about truma, ma'aser Rishon, ma'aser sheni aviv. So I want to review this point. If I wrongfully, b'shoigig b'mezid, God forbid, I separated ma'aser Rishon, even though normally when the Levi gets the ma'aser Rishon, the Levi doesn't have to be concerned with truma because it was already trumad prior. But if the owner did not separate truma, when the Levi gets the ma'aser Rishon, just to know the rule, not only does the Levi have to separate ma'aser and minha ma'aser, prior to doing that, he has to remove the percent of truma from his ma'aser Rishon. Same thing is your magdem ma'aser sheni to ma'aser Rishon. Normally, when I separate ma'aser sheni for me, from the ma'aser sheni, I don't have to separate ma'aser Rishon. I did that already, even though I didn't do it from the ma'aser sheni, but I did it from this because this was in the pile when I separated the ma'aser Rishon. The ma'aser Rishon was separated for this before it was specified to become the ma'aser sheni. But if I separate ma'aser sheni before ma'aser Rishon, I'm chayiv to separate ma'aser Rishon from the ma'aser sheni. All of this is only true when the time of obligation went into effect, meaning that the product became gemar mulachad. As an example, meruach. In other cases, re'iyas penei habayis. Since there is a chiyuv to be toidem uma'aser, here we say that if you went out of order, aside of the issue of going out of order, you have to rectify it. You have to go and you have to separate, like we said, kol hakoidem es chaveroi mischayev boy. No, it's ma'aser Rishon comes before ma'aser sheni. Ma'aser sheni needs to have ma'aser Rishon removed from it. But what happens if a person, for right or wrong, decided to give trumas or ma'aseres before the time of obligation? Really, it would mean before you smooth the pile. The example that Chazal give, you can't give it when it's connected to the ground, is that you only had stalks, shibalim. You didn't even go through the process of taking off the shell, of doing the winnowing. But it doesn't have to be only bishibalim, but that's just as an example. It's pre-meruach. Here, nothing has to be tithed. What happens if someone goes ahead now and they give ma'aser Rishon to the Levi? I want you to know the halacha is that this product is resolved with ma'aser Rishon. It takes effect, even though you are not obligated. Another detail will be that the Levi that receives this ma'aser Rishon has to give trumas ma'aser, but the Levi does not have to give truma. That's a big rule. Now, this is very much connected to being ma'acher the mugdam, to be magdam the me'uchar. In such a case, if ma'aser Rishon shegdimai b'shibalim prior to giving truma, here you don't have to give truma from the ma'aser Rishon. Will we say that you're oiver or you're not oiver? Maybe you're not oiver. Why are you not oiver? Because let's go with the chiddush, right, of Rab Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. It doesn't have to be linked, but I see the hemshech over here. He holds the violation is only when you separate the mukdam later. You won't be separating the mukdam later. You won't be separating truma at all from the ma'aser. I'm not talking about from the pile. That which you separated is separated. Stands by its own. Maybe, therefore, in that case, you're not violating. Because if you would have to separate from the ma'aser truma, even according to the first opinion of Rab Chia Barva, there's going to be two separations. Ma'aser rishon, which is the me'uchar, you are magdim, you're chayiv. There isn't two here. Or we don't say that. Why don't we say that? Because from the pile that remains, at some point you have to take truma. I'm the owner. I'm not the Levi. The owner who separated ma'aser rishon b'shivalim, I will be taking truma at a later point when I make the meruach. I can even do it now. I don't have to. So that's the two sides over here. Oiver, oy eino oiver ela ala seder. And this is an inquiry that remains unresolved. Mamish Gavaldik. Okay. This is a very deep Gemara in really going to the root of order. How do you define order? It's great. This is very relevant. Now, the first that you can be ma'acher, that the Mishnah spoke out, befedish, was bikurim, and truma. And like we mentioned in the introduction, that we will see in a moment, that we got a problem with that. Why is that? That Tonyan Kumei Drababo, a Braisa, was taught in the presence of Rabbi Abo. And here again, the challenge that we have with the Girsa'os, the easy, where we're simply walking on the shoulders of giants that comb through the Yerushalmi, making it for us already a trotted path. So let's go with this Girsa. Habikurim einon ma'akve mesatruma. Now, to understand what that means, habikurim is not ma'akev truma. Hold on. We're going to read the more words, even in this girsa, but more words to chapa. We're talking about in the Marafulda. So look in the Marafulda, 3 lines under the Gemara, in the beginning of the medium lines. Habikurim einon ma'akve mesatruma. Says the Marafulda like this. Lashon ha-tosefta. I'm quoting the Tosefta. Higdim truma lebikurim. If someone did that, or if you were magdim ma'aser rishon letruma, or if you were magdim sheni l'rishon. So the rule that we just mentioned of kol hakoidim es chavedim es chayev boy is spoken out here in this Tosefta. Rishon lo yoichal ad sheyoitzi aleh truma. The ma'aser rishon cannot be eaten even by the Levi. Not the shibolim, guys. We're going back to the normal case. There's the miruach. I'm obligated to separate, and the Torah tells me do it on the order. If I go out of order, the Mishnah says it's effective, but it won't be like your normal. Normally, when you give ma'aser rishon to the Levi, all the Levi has to do is resolve trumas ma'aser. Here, he has to also resolve truma. Kama sheni. When you separated ma'aser sheni before ma'aser rishon, you can't just take it to Yerushalmi. No, lo yoichel ad sheyoitzi la rishon. Now, says the Tosefta, she'ein truma ma'akeves habikurim. Or, the Garsinan Gamkein, she'ein habikurim ma'akve mesatruma. In other words, the question, like it's missing words, right? It's not missing words. When the Braisa gives an example of the rule of kol hakoidim es chavedim es chayev boy, I have a kasha. Like the Marafulda is asking, why doesn't the Braisa also give the mashal, give the case of truma and bikurim? Doesn't give that case. He says, when you take off ma'aser rishon before truma, you have to take truma from the ma'aser rishon. When you take ma'aser sheni before ma'aser rishon, you got to take ma'aser rishon off the ma'aser sheni itself. Good. Why didn't the Braisa say the same thing with truma and bikurim? Is a raya that we don't say the same thing by truma and bikurim, which would mean that if I separated truma before bikurim, from the truma, I don't have to separate bikurim. Lefikach loitani nami truma loisoichel acha yafresh ala bikurim. We don't say that. Because only the kol hakoidem es chavere chaverem es chayiv boy, implying that truma and bikurim, it's not koidem chavere. There isn't koidem chavere. It's whichever one you want, you can do first. Why? Before why? In other words, from the fact that the Braisa says, and I'm going back inside our Gemara, that bikurim einon ma'akvem es truma, which means that if I separated truma before bikurim, I don't have to separate bikurim from the truma. That must be that this Tana holds that bikurim doesn't have to be before bikurim. Because that bikurim doesn't have to be before truma. Thank you. Because if bikurim would have to be before truma, kol hakoidem es chavere, chaverem es chayiv boy. So the Braisa that's teaching me the rule of kol hakoidem es chavere, chaverem es chayiv boy, dafke does not give an example of truma and bikurim, which implies that truma and bikurim are not related. You can separate whichever one you want before the other. That is at odds with our Mishnah. That's a problem. If we understand the Braisa correctly. And indeed, Amaloin, you understood the Braisa correctly. Shkoyach, you learned the Tosefta good. Yeah, and it's a machloikas tanoim. And the greatness of Rabbi Abba is he knew information that no one knew. Nowhere do we have, at least what it says over here, befedish, that this opinion is from Abba Pinimoin. Nutana. Imagine the Pnimius de Abba. It sounds like you're learning Kabbalah. Pnimius Atik, Pnimius Abba. The Abba Pnimoini. And Rabbi Yossi, when he heard this, he says, Haida the Abba Pnimoin. Where else? Where else do we have such a shita? In other words, he's the one that holds Aviv, that Truma and Bikurim, anyone you want goes before the other.
Does he bring a Braisa Mishnah to support this statement?
Let's go. Amalei Rabmana, Shemois Abba. I heard my father teach the following Braisa. I found one other Braisa. Even there, it doesn't say Abba Pnimoin Oimer. In other words, it was an Abba Bo that had a Mesoira, that there's an Abba Pnimoin. And he holds that Truma and Bikurim, whichever one you want can come first. Now that we found a Tosefta that gives examples, but skips the example of Truma and Bikurim, which implies that there's no Kedima, you're right, good. And I found one more. No, it's the more Braises you find that contradict our Mishnah, the better it is to say you understood the Braisa correctly. Because the other alternative would be to give some sort of justification why the Braisa doesn't give the example of Truma and Bikurim. One would have argued there is no Machlokes Tanoim. We're not looking to make a Machlokes. But there is a Machlokes regardless. And what's the Braisa? It's unoff. There's no name of the author, but this Braisa, B'Mesoira, is Abba Pnimoin. Bikurim b'Yeminoi u'Truma b'Smoiloi. The Braisa, Aviv, is not speaking about Truma before Bikurim. The Braisa is speaking about Truma and Bikurim at the same time. Here again, there's a chiddush, because you might have thought that the prohibition is not to be ma'acher, not to be magdim, not to be ma'acher. At the same time, is the obligation to do A before B, or is the prohibition don't do B after A? If you do it at the same time, you didn't do A before B. But if you do something at the same time, you didn't do B after A. And we're saying it's the Zelbazach. The fact that the Braisa allows for you at the same time to separate Bikurim in your right hand, Truma in your left hand, did you violate Loisa Acher? So says the Gemara, this is what Rabmana is saying. I heard from my Tata that there are some Tanoim that say you are over. Is Tanoi Tonei Eino over? There's a chiddush again. You might have argued that everyone holds Bikurim comes before Truma. That would be one way that we are rejecting. The reason why some Tanoim say you're not violating is because the violation is only if you do one after the other. Here you're doing it at the same time. But that's not the way he understood that. Man the Omar Oiver is the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan means the Shita, the majority opinion that Bikurim has to come before Truma, has to come before Truma. If you do Bikurim and Truma at the same time, you violated the Loisa Acher. Man the Omar, right? Just put in the Aleph always. Eino Oiver. This is the Shita of Abba Penimoin. Beautiful. And if, in other words, we're making a statement, if you can do it the basachas, it's only because there's no din kedima. If there's no din kedima, then you don't even need to do it the basachas. Then you can do truma before bikurim. And indeed, and if you do truma before bikurim, you don't have to separate the bikurim from the truma.
Source. They also
So Rabbi Mendel is, in other words, obviously Abba Penima, and let's go with that, did not understand in the pasuk milayascha v'dimacha loisa'acher to mean the way we're teaching it, that bikurim and truma don't go out of order. Fakir, the pasuk is speaking about the way we learned chitas. He learns it differently. First of all, you can argue milayascha doesn't go to bikurim. All of this is a remes. Dimacha doesn't go to truma. Aleph. Number two, you can say the loy sa'achar is what we learned at the end of yesterday's shir. On top of this Ahmed, that actually we're speaking about Parshas Kisavai. Don't delay this man habiyur maisres, which is Erev Pesach or Erev last days of Pesach on the 4th and the 7th year. It's a lav. Don't delay. People can separate and not give it. Amazing. And I think there's a big pnimius. In other words, when you're telling me that if you remove truma, you don't have to remove bikurim from the truma, it must be that the pnimius of truma and of bikurim, they're the same thing. Salderech we find shofar v'rishon shchaliyas b'Shabbos. So al pinigla, we don't blow the shofar gzeira derabba. And Chassidus asks, there's a mitzvah say to blow the shofar. I know the chachamim yesh koich v'yat chachamim right la'akar dovim en atoyda b'sheva al taisa, but still the chachamim are telling you don't do the mitzvah of shofar. We're missing shofar. So Chassidus says that what shofar accomplishes, Shabbos accomplishes. The pnimius of Shabbos and the pnimius of shofar is the same thing. So you're getting whatever shofar is bringing about. Truma and bikurim, the pnimius have the same idea. And therefore, if they are the same, it makes sense that when you separate truma, you don't have to separate bikurim from the truma. This is the bikurim. Amazing. Okay, Atkan. Now, Chavra Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. It's a whole new sugya. It's a fascinating sugya. Generally, we say Dvarim Shebelev Einam Dvarim. Make no mistake. Normally, what counts is what I say. Nevertheless, it's not so simple. In 4 areas in halacha, like we said in the introduction, 4 areas in halacha: Trumas u'Maisres, Nidrei Hegdish, Nidarim, and Shavuos. There is a rule of piv v'li b'shavim. And it's so important that piv v'li b'shavim that even if one could have accomplished something only with thought, if you thought and said and they're not aligned, your unaligned speech undoes your thoughts. And let's read the Mishnah. Hamischavin loimer truma. That was your intention. Hamischavin, you know it, God knows it. More than that, even if you took 2%, what you took is showing that you're separating, you didn't count exact 10, you took approximate 2. But the word, instead of saying truma, you said meiser, you didn't drink coffee, your mouth was connected to another system. Or meiser v'amar truma. We want to make it clear. Doesn't matter in what order you went. Or, now we're extending it to Nidrei Hegdish. And by the way, Trumas u'Maisres, like Nidrei Hegdish, we already mentioned this, if there is a need, you can be Oikeret L'Mafreya. It's really all Nidarim. And Shavuos. It's good. It follows the same consistent ruling. If a person had an animal, they had in mind to designate this as an oila. That was their kavana. What the word came out was shlamim. Or shlamim v'amar oila. Makes no difference in what direction. It's not about kedusha chamura, kedusha kala. It's not about that. It's that your the words that came out and your intent are not aligned. Or general, even if it's not about kedusha in yanim. General can be both nedarim and shvuos. The next 2 cases includes both. She'eni nichnas labayizeh. She'eni nichnas really in the neder would be bayizeh asur olai kekarbin. Or koinem bayezeh olai, right? Remember in the Mesechtes Nedarim. But that doesn't matter. The content is, I am prohibiting entering this home to the right, Aviv. You wanted to prohibit the home to the right. You said the left. Not aligned. But erroneously, v'amar lezeh, or she'eni nehena lezeh v'amar lezeh. About a person, I want to benefit from a person, and you said the wrong person. In all of these cases, trumas u'maisres, in nidrei hegdish, in the darim, and in shvuos, loy amar klum. What you said is completely ineffective. They cancel out each other. What is needed, what's essential, you need for your mouth. It's amazing how your heart, when people think about thinking, they normally point to their brain. And it's important to know that we do a lot of thinking in our heart. Uba halev maven. Someone told me that scientifically now they know that there are thinking cells, begashmius, in the heart, physically. Which, of course, if they discovered it or not, there's a concept where things, I'm just going to put it out there. It's interesting. That when we speak about machshava, and we understand this, Alpi Chasidus, a lot better, we are dafka speaking about bina, not about chachma. Let me just make that point. That's not negaya that much. Why? I'm not doing any thinking in the chachma. I'm having enough bittul to be aware of what is. There are ideas that are being thought beyond me that I'm picking up. I am not the doer. I'm not the thinker. There's no ego in chachma. And whenever it's needed for me to be the thinker, we speak about bina, and bina is connected to the heart. But anyways,
וידעת היום והשבות לבבך את בינה.
Very good. But over there, beficha, very good. So machshava is belief. The belvavcha is belief. So ache yehei piveli by shavin. So words that are said in error, my friends, are completely disregarded. Now, let's see how the Gemara begins to connect topics that are so not connected without the Gemara connecting them, which is great. So let's begin. Tamon Taninin, we learned, and we're quoting a Mishnah in Mesechtes Nazir in the 5th chapter. Beishamai Yoimrim, Hegdish To'us is nevertheless a Hegdish. What are we talking about? Look inside the Gemara folder to get more context. All the way on the top, 3 lines from the top in the beginning of the Gemara. Tamon Taninin Perikei de Nazir. Hegdish To'us, Hegdish, right, the last big line over the Gemara. The case over there was, Ketzat, a person said that Shoir Shachur Sheyetze Rishon Mi Beisi, his barn door opened up. An animal is about to walk out. This person, for whatever reason, presumed that a black ox is walking out. We're dafka speaking about black or white in the beginning, because black or white is not halachically consequential. Doesn't make a difference. We're not racist. It's just defining. So he said that the black ox that's walking from the house is a hegdish. What does it sound like? The story of Yiftach Hagiladi, Mamish, right? Mamish. So, and what happened? What happened is that an ox walked out of his barn, but there was a white ox. So think before you look inside. What would you think is the halacha? I want to tell you right away, when you begin learning this, it's not our Mishnah. There is superficially, without the Gemara going deeper. We're speaking about a person who intends to consecrate the first animal that walks out of his barn. He wants to do that, and he said that. Now, he added the detail, which you can argue doesn't matter. Because what difference does it make for him if it's black or white? Or no, since he made that detail, it's as if he made a condition. Since he made a detail, it's as if he says, I'm being magdish, the first animal that goes around. But if it's black, if it's white, I won't be magdish it. Why? I have no idea. So anyway, that's the superficial. Let's keep on reading inside the Marafulda. What happened was V'yatza Lavan. So now, Machloikis. Beishamai Oimrim Hegdish. And the words that they use is Hegdish, To'us Hegdish. Again, one would argue, why is Hegdish To'us Hegdish? Because there isn't an intrinsic mistake. The mistake was in a detail that Beishamai considers inconsequential. So we are allowed halachically to ignore, right? Palginan dibura. We don't care about that detail because the owner didn't care about that detail. And Beisil Elohim Einoi Hegdish. No, he said the black ox that goes out first. What came out first wasn't black. What came out was white. Even if a black came out second, so it's black, but it's second. It's not first. What he said did not happen. If what he said did not happen, you don't have Hegdish. So in other words, when you begin learning that, you can't link it yet. But before we come to our sugi over there in Nazir, there's a machloikes amoyroyim, how far to extend Beishamai and Beisilol. And now we're going to already start seeing a connection. For my Rabbi Yirmiyah, let me tell you something. That regarding that the Shitas Beishamai, that Bol Loimar Chulen, you know when Beishamai says the words Hegdish B'to'os Hegdish. Now let me go to a real mistake, not to a inconsequential black or white. An animal is leaving his barn. This person is wanted to say the animal that's leaving my barn is Chulen. But he said Oila. That's the case of our Mishnah. He intended to say, why did he have to say Chulen? I don't know. He intended to say Chulen, a real mistake. And he said an Oila. So Rabbi Yirmiyah understood that Beishamai isn't only saying his halacha because black and white is taka inconsequential. No. It's amazing. What we're saying is that Beishamai is saying that the words that he said take effect. In the case of black and white, you can argue, how is it taking effect? He said black, what came out was white. Yeah, because those words are inconsequential. Takes effect. And even if he wanted to say Chulen, but he said Oila, what he said takes effect. Kacha.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Isn't the machshava come from the lave? So if you say something, don't you actually mean it? Like, for example, you said you mean Chulen, but you accidentally spoke Oila.
That's the question. So that's a good question. 1 second. Mamish, guy, 1 second. It sounds like, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, let's come back over here, that Rabbi Yirmiyah doesn't need Libei Shamai for there to be Pivel Libei Shavin. Sounds like this.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep on going. Yes. In other words, when you learn the Mishnah, you say it's completely not related. Because in the black and the white, he wanted to be Magdish, the first ox. That's the way we can understand it. He actually said some of it. So the question is, can you discount a detail? But that's not what Rabbi Yirmiyah understood in Beishamai. Rabbi Yirmiyah understood in Beishamai that Beishamai somehow, by the example of the black and white ox, is telling me that when it comes to a declaration of Hegdish, focus on the words that were said. Not only that, only focus on the main words. Ignore the secondary words. But even if the person wanted to say Chulen and he said an Oila Kacha, now not everyone agrees with Rabbi Yirmiyah. No, Rabbi Yosi da Amoira. No. Where does Beishamai say the words that Hegdish betos Hegdish only when he had Kavana to be Magdish? He wanted to be Magdish one ox, the black ox. Came out a white ox. Ella shato machmas davar acher. If there is some sort of secondary mistake, Beishamai says, if what he wanted, he said he wanted to be Magdish. We have the right to interpret that the black or white is not negeya, and therefore we allow it to go into effect. But for you to extend it to a case where the person did not want to be Magdish, for you to say that we don't care what he had in his mind, nish dazak Beishamai. Okay, now that we have the machlekes between Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Yosi in Nazir, now let's bring it back over here. Whose opinion does our Mishnah follow? So says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, who says that even when a person wants to say Chulen and he says Oila, which is one of the examples of our Mishnah is Oila Shlamim, right? But imagine, even Chulen and Oila, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, our Mishnah is Dafka not Beishamai. Doesn't bother anyone. But al datei de Rabbi Yirmiyah b'machloikes. If we are to understand the Mishnah in Nazir the way he understands it, However, al date the Tana Rabbi Yosi, our Mishnah even follows Beis Shammai. When does Beis Shammai allow for there to be something off? If the something off is in something inconsequential. Whenever it's about something consequential, which are all of the cases of our Mishnah, you intend to do Aleph. That's the Ikir. Oila and Shlamim are different. Black and white are not different. Everyone will agree with our Mishnah, which is amazing, that your statement is only effective if it's aligned with your intention. Now, 1 second. It's beautiful, the Hemshech. And now let's finally speak about what we mentioned. I mentioned this a few times already. Whenever we speak about that you don't need to physically separate Truma, it's enough to have a mental, it's enough to have the Nechshav. What does the Nechshav mean? What does the Nechshav mean? Does the Nechshav, literally it means, Aviv, Machshava. How do you say Machshava? Thoughts. Does it mean you can actually affect a change in status from Tevel to Mesuken to Truma by just a thought, or do you need to verbalize your thought? It says the Gemara, 20, we learned in a Braisa, this is amazing. This is based on a pasuk that we have in Vayikra. And if you look inside the Torah, Oir HaShalom, take a look at the pasuk. It says, "Oy nefesh kisishava levate bisfosayim, levate bisfosayim." The pasuk there is speaking about one of the categories of oaths that's called the shvuas bitoy. Shvuas bitoy means that I am able, through my words, to bring upon myself an obligation to do or not to do, or to speak about the past. Did I do or did I not do? Right? So shtayim shein arba. I take an oath that I will eat or that I won't eat, or I swear that I did eat or that I didn't eat. In all of these cases, my friends, if I took, God forbid, an oath that is not accurate, if it's about the past, it was not accurate when I said it. If it's about the future, if I don't do what I swore, so there's halacha that you have to bring a korban. Now, the way, the words that the Torah uses is levate bisfasayim. Levate means to express with your lips. The way we will learn the limud of this braisa, that really, l'chu'ura, the Torah could have said, bisfosayim levate. Why do we say levate bisfosayim? So that's one way of understanding the words in the pasuk. If Hashem would have written in the Torah, bisfosayim levate, with lips to express, that then would have implied that you have to dafka express it with your lips. Bisfosayim levate. Since the Torah uses the words first, levate bisfosayim, levate means to express, we're going with the premise that a person is able to express himself, herself, with thoughts. It's an expression. Ubalashana Chasidis, the levushim don't begin with dibur. Same levush. It's a levush. You're expressing. You have a feeling and you are expressing it with your words to someone else. Or to yourself with words, with your thoughts to yourself, but it's an expression. So levate bisfosayim is understood by this Tana, either or. Not only, either or. You are able, imagine, to affect a change with only mental. Now, what I said right now is what the Braisa is saying. Now, we're going through many people schwitzing. You're going to start reading it and you're going to think that I made a mistake. I make many mistakes, not over here. When the Braisa says, v'loy believe, let me tell you what the Braisa is excluding. If a person made a mental decision, Aviv, to declare an oath with his lips, if my decision, believe, was to say it, then, according to all opinions, it will only go into effect when I say it. If I never made a decision to exclusively express myself with my lips, then this Tana holds I have always the option either to take an oath with my sfasayim or to do any type of bitoy, which means expression, including only thought. Gavaldik, the power of thought. So when the Braisa says v'loy believe, actually this Tana holds that you could take an oath, believe. The loy believe is only in the case that I'm saying. You might think that if you made a mental decision to verbally declare an oath, You might think, still you can do it with your thoughts. That not. The Torah writes bisfasayim that if you decided to use your lips, then you have to use your lips. But when you don't have such a mental decision to verbally declare, you can do whichever one you want. You would think that I exclude altogether the possibility of only using your mental expression. No. Talmud Leimer levate. Levate, like we mentioned, that's the way we'll learn it. That the Torah did not write bisfasayim levate. Bisfasayim levate would mean only with your lips you could express. If you express it with your machshava, believe, it's nothing. No. Levate, bisfasayim, other, viduvils. Gewaldig. And now what we have is something very unusual. We do have, on occasion, when there's no better option, we do have a concept that Rav, because of his close proximity to the times of the Tanoim, he was a Talmud of Tanoim, and he was the head of the Yeshiva and Surah. When we need to, we say that the Rav Tanuhu Upalik. Even though generally Amirayim either cannot or they don't want to, and they normally don't argue with Tanoim. We have such an exception by Rav. We have such an exception with Rabbi Yochanan, and there's a big question whether we have the same exception with Shmuel, who was the contemporary of Rav. Our Yerushalmi holds that Shmuel, beferish, like Rav, has the koyach to argue with Atana. It's not even a problem. So Atana says clearly the words Talmud Loimer Levate. Levate tells you that don't be moitzi, don't exclude Hagoymer Belev. Gemira Belev is effective, equal to Sfasayim. Shmuel Omar, Shmuel sagt nicht. Argues with Hagoymer Beliboy ein chayev ad sheyoytze b'sfasav. He doesn't have this whole levate b'sfasayim. He says, well, who cares what word comes first? Levate b'sfasayim means you are liable a korban chatas. So speaking about, again, this topic is about a stama shvua, which is one of the examples of our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah spoke about trumas u'maisris, nidrei hegdish, nidarim, and shvuos. Yeah, in shvuos, you have many categories of shvuos. Shvuos bitui, again, a person took an oath. If their oath is inaccurate, right? I swear that I will eat today bread. If I don't eat bread, bishoygig, I'm chayiv to bring a korban chatas. When am I chayiv to bring a korban chatas? When are you chayiv? Ad sheyoytze b'sfasa. The Braisa holds, if I had in mind, I'm saying this in my heart, I'm eating bread today, and I don't, I'm also chayiv a korban chatas. That's the Gemara. Now the kasha the Gemara is asking is not I found a Tana against Shmuel. Shkoyach. We already found a Tana against Shmuel. The Gemara is asking that I have a Tana that has another source. And Shmuel will have to deal with that source. Levate b'sfasayim levate is something the Gemara understood Shmuel can deal with. It's not a raya. But over here, now we're bringing the following. In Parshas Vayakel, when we're speaking about people that nidrei hegdish doesn't only mean oila shlamim, it also means to the bedek habayis. That means when we were donating money to the temple. What happens if a person made a resolution in their heart to give money? So the Torah uses the words over there. Right, the whole pasuk is again Torah or vayivayu hanoshim al hanoshim koil nidiv leiv. Koil nidiv leiv means whoever had a generosity in their heart. So how do you understand the generosity of the heart? Is the generosity in the heart the motivator to the actual verbal commitment? Because when it comes to being magdish lebedek habayis amida ligvoya kimisirase lahedyet vadai, just saying I will give X, Y, and Z. By the way, even to tzedakah, you're bound by it. Here we're going more. Do you have to even say it? So the Braisa says the fact that the Torah says the words koil nediv leiv, ze hagoymer boleiv. That would mean that even if a person never said they're making a donation, if they only made a mental expression, not if, not maybe, not I would like to, not I'm thinking about, I am making that commitment, that's why the Torah uses dafka the words, not kol nediv yad, kol nediv leiv. 1 second. Maybe not. So 1 second. It says nediv leiv. Like what's the havamina? We have nediv leiv. So look inside the last line in the Pnei Moshe of Ahadachsiv kol nediv leiv. Maybe asks the Braisa. That's prat. We said this in the words of introduction. Lamakchish bisfasav. Kol nediv leiv means that if you have in your heart to do A and you said B, then it's not good. Then it's not good. That's maybe what an adiv leiv means. So but maybe you have to say it. You have to say it and mean it. How do you know that only meaning it is enough? Daf lamed beis on the top. So now we're quoting another pasuk from last week's parsha Kiseitze. Kishu oimer moitzi sifasecha tishmoid. We already know from over there how they moitzi bisfas of amor that I am bound to keep what my lips said. So hama ani mekayim kol adiv leiv. That's to tell you zeh hagoimer belev. So l'chuura. In other words, it's not just a kasha abraisa against Shmuel. There's a source called the divlev. What will Shmuel do with that? Shmuel is saying that you have to have a verbal declaration. Here we have a kol divlev, even a mental expression. So answers the Gemara, this is very important, that even Shita Shmuel is only lekarben. Wow. In other words, when am I chayiv a korban chatos for violating b'shoigeg, going against my oath? That is if I verbalize my oath. Aber, when it comes, that's where he said that, by an oath. But when it comes to hegdish, which my friends includes trumas u'maisres, even Shmuel agrees that just a mental expression is enough. The koyach of machshava. It's beautiful. Gewaltig. And again, just to conclude, one thing is clear. Even though I'm able to affect a change only with my thought, if my words contradict my thoughts, that's our Mishnah, then everything is nullified. And just to say, when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to these United States, and he spoke about how what's most important for one's health is the oxygen. The air has to be clean. And as it is begashmius, because it is beruchnius. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying that the air in America is not clean. And how do you purify the air? So he made a whole campaign, which is very relevant to all of us, to have certain parts of Torah that we know by heart, whether it's Mishnayos or Tanya, etc. And when you go on the streets, unless halachically you're not allowed to, you should be saying words of Torah. And even if you can't say it and you think it, so the Frierdiker Rebbe quoted an expression that we have in Nigla in not a positive context of machshava mayelas. Machshava mayelas is primarily used by pigul, that your machshava, right, of the kohen, can be mefagel the carbon. But the Frierdiker Rebbe always used this expression in a very positive way. Machshava mayelas means that, that he speaks about that when the Rebbe thinks about a chassid, the machshava of the Rebbe is moil, it elevates the chassid. Mamish. Machshava mayelas. So machshava, and there was a big shturim then, I don't know when, in the early 1940s, about how can the Frierdiker Rebbe say that just thinking words would be metayir da'avid. Where did we find such a thing? There used to be a journal. I forgot the name of the journal. I know that my Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi learned with us a essay that Rebbe wrote then to show al pi nigla there are 5 cases, one greater than the other, where machshava bayeles, and one of them is this topic. Think about it. That I, with my machshava, can you imagine? Tevel is chayv misa b'dei shamayim. Even Shmuel, even those who hold that when it comes to a shvuas and a darim, over there you have to have levate b'sfosayim. But when it comes to a hegdish, machshava mayeles, so we have to really do our best of really tracking what we're having in our mind. And commitments to hegdish that we make in our minds are binding. If I have machshava to be mafresh, to designate, true, now I have to do it with specificity. Shkoyach.
Oh, no.
Specificity.
Yes.
Shkoyach. To be continued.